Dr. Jane Ruby, what are you doing in my office?
Tom, I love spending time in your office. We're breaking news. We're talking to the people.
But on Monday,
Yes.
October 3rd, 4th, 5th, October 5th, something big is happening. What's happening?
Something big. We have on the show, you and I are going to co-interview the one and only Corey Lewandowski.
Corey Lewandowski.
Oh, yeah. Former campaign manager to President Trump. And he's here to talk about his new book, Trump, America First.
Monday, October 5th, 9 a.m., theunitedwest.org. Or if you're in South Florida, you can listen on the radio. You and I interviewing Corey Lewandowski.
Looking forward to it.
Hey, let's make it happen.
Be there,
right.
be square.
All right.
This is Make America Think Again with your Google Blacklisted host, Tom Trento.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger. No, Will Robinson. Danger. Danger.
All right, these are the kind of days on October 2nd, 2020. Kind of days where you're pre-planning your radio show, you're pre-planning your day, your life, whatever. It goes right out the window, and you adjust to, that's the beauty, the absolute beauty of a 9 o'clock in the morning radio show, simulcast on theunitedwest.org. All of you listening, if you want to drive home and watch the show on your TV, you can watch it on your big screen TVs, theunitedwest.org, theunitedwest.org. If you get a little warning that says danger, danger, don't believe it. We're going to do a show on that next week. We're being under attack by big tech, but you can watch at theunitedwest.org. What a show we have today. Or you can listen, WNN, 1470 AM on your dial. You can switch over to 95.3 FM on your dial. And you want to listen to today's show. I'm your host, Tom Trento. Susie Gold is an observant Jew, and Sukkoth is starting today. So we gave her the day off, but we're going to miss her today. But we have 3 doctors lined up. Why do we have 3 doctors lined up? We have a medical situation, a medical emergency, the end of the world if you listen to MSNBC and CNN. And if you haven't heard, if I'm telling you for the first time, stay in your lane on the highway. It's pretty disturbing news. I have had several friends who have contracted the Wuhan virus, the China virus, COVID-19. COVID-19 means corona. Take the first 2 letters, C-O. Take the next 2 letters from virus, V-I, COVID. Put a D, disease, COVID-19 is the year it was discovered. COVID-19, we found out at 1 o'clock in the morning that President Donald Trump and his wife, the First Lady Melania, have contracted COVID-19. They have the infection. And we heard a little earlier in the evening, around 10, 11 o'clock, that a special advisor to the president, Hope Hicks, you've seen her a lot, she had contracted COVID-19. And the president was on Sean Hannity's show last night and said that Hope Hicks travels very closely with the president's team. He has a team of advisors, national security, everything. And don't know where he got it or where Melania got it or where Hope got it. It's one of these situations. But the President of the United States of America, the leader of the free world, the most significant world leader, has come down with COVID-19. So we're going to take a clinical, a dispassionate, a medical, a psychological, and even a theological look at the situation today to help everyone understand what's going on. There's no need for flailing of arms and running all over the place, even though we know this is an extremely deadly virus, particularly to a class of individuals that are over a particular age. But we're going to look at it with three esteemed doctors. And I think we'll start out. We have Jane Ruby, Dr. Jane Ruby, in the studio. If you could say hello, Jane.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone?
Do we have her on screen? Can we get her on camera so everybody can see pretty Jane Ruby? There she
Morning.
is.
Good morning, everyone.
We have Dr. Ruby, who is a recent Floridian from the formerly great state of Virginia. And when she was in Virginia, give us 30 seconds on your experience with COVID-19.
Sure, I had it actually in March, and my theory is with all viruses, they're much more virulent and strong in the beginning. They cause more damage as they plow their way through the population. They become weaker as they replicate. They use more of their DNA up. I had it at a critical time. I know people still can be sick now, depending on their status. I was quite sick for 5 weeks. I did not go into respiratory decompensation, thank God, but was quite ill. And I still have some residual, which we can talk about. And we have talked about on your show before. But I want to make one clarification, Tom. The president has tested positive. I think we all need to be very careful in our language here. He's not necessarily come down with an infection or an illness that we know of yet. People are testing positive. That's the definition of a case, especially without any symptoms.
All right, Jane, thank you very much. We're going to get back and forth to you. Who do we have with us first? I see Dr. Andy Bostom. Is he the first one? Let's put him up first. Dr. Andy Bostom, a dear friend of ours on a personal level for many, many years, dealing with many issues related to national security, anti-Semitism, Israel, all of that. But Andy Bostom is a prolific scholar, prolific writer, also a epidemiologist, a doctor that does a lot of work on various medical issues. And we got him out of bed. He was going to relax today. We got him out of bed. We said, Andy, we need your input.
My AFib got me out of bed about
your
3
AFib, commercials for that. But Dr. Andy Bostom, you found out the president and his wife have COVID. And we don't want to give any indication on our show here today that one human being is more important than any other human being, but on a human level, but on a political level, on a world global level, we have a very significant individual that's contracted the disease. Andy, give us your initial view of what's going on, and then I want to dig into a little bit that Donald Trump, not his wife, but Donald Trump is in a higher risk category. And what does that mean clinically?
One second, Tom. Jane, you might not have heard her, but she brought up a very important point.
Yes, she did. I agree.
I didn't
repeat
hear her.
it.
What did she say?
He doesn't have COVID. He has. So clarify that, Doc.
Yeah. So Mark and Jane, nice to meet you, Jane. Yes, the point that Jane made right away is that all we know thus far is that he's quote unquote tested positive. And same thing with Melania. There was some report that maybe Hope Hicks had symptoms, but those weren't defined. So, that's slightly different. But so, and this really, I pray to Hashem that's the way this works out, is that this could be a real education for the whole public. Let's just pray for the best, and that this is mild, this is asymptomatic to mild, whatever it is, positivity, COVID-19 positivity. And it would be interesting if at some point we could learn what the initial test result was. In other words, we're getting these broad definitions that people are quote unquote positive. But in fact, Tom, it's and I'm sure Jane knows this. It's really unfortunate, given that we have much more information in most systems when they do the testing. So the confirmatory test is something called reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, and what that really means, to break it down, is that they're amplifying a specific segment, in this case, of the virus's RNA. And they're doing it on a truly exponential scale. And they record that in something called cycle thresholds. So for example, one company that does a huge amount of testing on campuses in the Northeast that I've learned published a sort of a research paper about their methodology, and they applied it to these Massachusetts nursing homes. And something about 33,000 patients. There were both the residents of the nursing homes and the staff. And what they found is that the cycle threshold basically goes up to 40. The test is, it can be set at 40, at 37, at 38, but essentially up to the range of about 40. And what they found is that when when someone becomes positive at a low cycle threshold, which we know from studies where you actually culture the virus at the same time that you run one of these PCR tests, that has a very strong correlation with the amount of virus you would actually get live in culture. And then that relationship, it's an inverse relationship. So the more cycles it takes for a test to quote unquote become positive, the less likely you are to be able to culture live virus. And in different laboratories, that breaks down at, say, cycle thresholds of 30, certainly 35, where you really can't culture any live virus anymore. In this institute, it's run through Harvard and MIT, where they're testing not only the nursing homes, they're doing a massive amount of testing. They're also testing, they're also testing 100 college campuses. What they found is that a test that becomes positive at 12 cycles has the equivalent of 2 billion copies of this fragment that they're amplifying, whereas a test that becomes positive at 38 has 8. That's a 250 million fold difference.
Wow.
And so let's pray that that all of them, that Hope Hicks and Melania Trump and Donald Trump are positive, certainly in that range above 30 and maybe even above 35, where, even the New York Times, to its credit, rarely they get something right. They did a lay press report and they broke down some of this information at the end of August. And they gave an interesting analogy for the public. They said, when you get to these really high thresholds at basically the limit of the test, so approaching 40, certainly above 35, they said, well, it's kind of like, a person that was visiting your house and a couple of weeks later, you notice maybe one of their hairs. It's a relatively, something passed through, but what does it actually mean? And again, the gold standard, and it's too tedious to do this obviously en masse, but the gold standard is to correlate these test findings, these cycle threshold recorded positivity of the test with viral culture. And there's a very linear inverse relationship. The more cycle thresholds you have to go through before a test becomes positive, the lower and lower your ability is to culture live virus. And so I just saw, Science, the journal has a lay outlet that they put out now, and it's reaching them too. There's a lot of scientists, a lot of investigators, clinical investigators saying, wait a minute, we can't just say, Joe Blow is positive. You got to say the cycle threshold at which they became positive. And, there'll be back and forth about how to standardize to different labs, and et cetera. But there was a beautiful analysis done from something called the Oxford Center for Clinical Evidence-Based Medicine, run by a Dr. Carl Hennigan. And their group has done incredible work on COVID, and it's very, very clinically oriented, which is why I like it. And they reviewed all the literature they could find. It's called a pooled analysis or a meta-analysis. And they basically came down, they were a little more conservative in their cut point. They argued that in pooling together all the cycle threshold testing versus live culture testing studies, and I think there were about a dozen of them, that they said, by the time you get to a cycle threshold above 30, your yield of live virus is low enough that, those people are not quote unquote necessarily positive. And I think that's, and if you want to be a little more, guarded and circumspect about all this, you could raise it to maybe 33, or if you really want to be circumspect, maybe raise it to 35. But, it has huge implications for the society, Tom.
Okay. Andy, here's what we need to do. I had a professor in school who used to teach us we have to bring the cookies to the lower shelf, right? That was a very interesting clinical analysis. And I'm learning stuff here, which is important. simply stated, how would you classify someone who's tested positive? When, what words do you use to say, oh, now they have COVID? So you can
Right.
test positive and not have it based upon the metrics you just laid out. So we don't know where he is in that, but
Right.
what would be the right language to use, the progressive language?
Well, first of all, at this point, the other elephant in the room, it's a two-elephant room. You know, it's the number of cycle thresholds, and we can move away from that. That's a little technical, but say, you know, high is suspicious. Very high at the limit of the test is suspicious that it means anything. The other thing, of course, is what's the clinical correlation? That, you know, are there symptoms? Is there a chest X-ray? Is there a chest CT that suggests a pneumonia? I mean, basically, what we're worried about with a true coronavirus infection is a pneumonia, even if it's not a, you know, immediately evident pneumonia in terms of symptoms. A person can be relatively asymptomatic, and then boom, you look at the chest X-ray, and they have significant findings. So this is the other thing that we've gotten away from. You know, positive test, schmositive test. What is the clinical picture of the human being that we're testing?
All right,
You know, that's very, very important. Again, I'm a little more concerned about Hope Hicks. They mentioned symptoms, but they were very vague about what. Well, what did she have a fever? Did she have a cough? Was she somewhat short of breath? What was going on with her? These are the things that we need to know.
I'm sure the White House is going to be very guarded before they start giving out this information. But Jane Ruby, Dr. Jane Ruby, has a question and observation for you, Andy.
No,
Sure.
Andy, that was an amazing description, and it really lays out the science behind why everybody must be calm and relax and wait for more information. I want to give a simple analogy to what Dr. Andy just laid out for us. If I swab your throat, any of your throats on any given day, you're going to be positive for strep and staph and a bunch of other things, but you're not going to be ill. And that's what we have to remember.
Okay.
The CDC itself has defined a case as something with or without symptoms. So what we're being reported as, oh, they had a spike in cases. We have to discern what they're really testing for, as Dr. Andy pointed out, and is that a case which is a positive presence of exposure without any symptoms. And we don't have enough information to know if there are symptoms yet. But even if there are, as I said before, the virus burns itself out as it plows through the human population. And like all life, it uses up its DNA to replicate, becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, with very rare exceptions. So I just wanted to add that in so that people had a good perspective on that.
That's an interesting way to put it. We're carrying junk around. We positively have it, but it hasn't affected us at this point.
Well, Tom, one of the interesting early indicators of exactly what Jane was saying, I'll never forget it. It was very poignant. There was this poor guy I think it was a Princess cruise ship. So he got clinically sick, but really just for 8 hours. His wife was asymptomatic the whole time, all the way back in February, tested negative. And she went home and was separated from him, and he was positive, but he had basically an 8-hour course. Had a high fever. It broke after 8 hours, and within a few days he was feeling well. So really, sort of like a rapid sort of flu syndrome that he had. Yet he was sent to this isolation facility at the University of Nebraska, where they do a lot of infectious disease study. And it was going on now. The poor guy was being interviewed, and he was getting these I assume they were these RT-PCR tests daily, twice a day, and they kept testing positive, and he was further and further removed from that 8-hour bout of infection. And they finally said to him, look, you know, we can't let you go until you test negative, but we don't think these tests really mean anything in terms of your clinical course. And of course, the issue had not been raised at that point about these high cycle thresholds and everything like that. But that incident stuck in my mind about how he could just be sort of sloughing off dead cells that had been infected weeks earlier. And because of the sensitivity of the test, they were amplifying these strands of RNA that they amplify. and it was clinically meaningless. And it was clearly clinically meaningless in this guy's case. And finally, I think it took about 4 to 6 weeks before they let him go.
Wow. All right, Dr. Andy Bostom, epidemiologist out of the wonderful Northeast, where the weather's changing and you can go watch the trees and leaves changing. We know you got to get going. You got a meeting related to this sort of information. We'll catch up with you next week, Andy Bostom. Take care.
Thanks again, Tom. Take care.
All right, Tom Trento, 9:22 in the morning. WWNN 1470 are on the radio. You're listening live. We took our regular Friday show, which we had very interesting. We had a Black Lives Matter fella that was going to be here and get involved with me a little bit on that. We had Frank Coconati from Chicago. Coconati, Paisan from Chicago. He's leading a national movement of Italian people to stop Democrat cities from knocking down Christopher Columbus's statue. You got to meet Frank. He'll be with us next week. We changed the show today because of the critically important information about the president, his wife contracting, testing positive, but not necessarily having COVID disease. Now we're going to go to an infectious disease expert specialist operating out of a hospital up in the Orlando area, friend of ours, Dr. Juan Torres. Dr. Juan Torres, welcome to our show.
Hi, Tom. Thank you.
You and I have spoken about our campaign mobilizing evangelicals in Florida to vote on November 3rd. And right now, if you turn to MSNBC, CNN, even ABC, they have the president dead, buried, and a constitutional crisis going on as to who's going to be the president. You're an expert on this. I don't know if you caught any of what Dr. Andy Bostom was saying, an epidemiologist, but give us your brief analysis, then we have some questions for you as to the president's condition and what we as concerned citizens should be looking and be aware of.
Well, let me say first, Tom, that I wish the best for President Trump and Melania. Then, based on the data that we know regarding COVID-19, most of the patients, more than 90% actually, they do recover very well. So I hope this is the case. And hopefully in the next few days, the President Trump let us know that he's doing well. The same thing with Melania. And I hope in my heart, this is gonna be one of those cases that they have fully recovery. And maybe he might not be able to be back in the campaign the way that he was because of the isolation issues. But I think that with the prayer of everybody, he should be okay.
All right, Dr. Torres, there's a lot of information coming out now that places the president in higher risk categories. One, he's in his mid-70s. Number two, he is clinically obese based upon his physicals. There's some indication that he's on some pre-diabetic medicine or cholesterol medicine, some cholesterol medicine. So analyzing someone like this, and I'm reading figures, people in their mid-70s, clinically obese, have a much higher rate, like 11% chance of mortality. What's the situation with the president and his physical condition?
Well, what you mentioned that's the case. The older we get, the more risky the COVID disease can be. Not only that, there are a couple of issues that, as you mentioned, that makes the president, I would say, I put the president at risk more than the average person or a young person who is very healthy. And it's very well known that not only age, but being diabetic, hypertensive, obese, as you say, can make things a little complicated. But I think still the president has a good chances that he's not a sick person. He doesn't have a significant underlying medical conditions. And the overall mortality for COVID is not the way that we were told in the beginning. You know, now we think that could be around a little bit more probably than influenza. And that will be maybe 1.5%, something like that. And but I hope he does well. I think that, you know, there is a good possibility, as many other patients, that he recover well.
Dr. Torres, I have a question, then Dr. Jane Ruby has a question for you. You're listening to Tom Trento today, Dr. Jane Ruby in studio, Dr. Juan Torres coming through Zoom on the UnitedWest.org, and everyone listening on WNN 1470 AM 95.3, 9:28 in the morning, almost the bottom of a very interesting hour on this Friday. What medically, what occurs with people who are overweight when they contract a virus such as this? Why is it more difficult for somebody overweight?
Well, there are several conditions that make patients not to be able to handle this infection or any infection well. And you know, the most important thing is your immunity, your immune status. You know, when we get older, our immune status is not the same compared with people who are younger. And they don't have the right response. They don't have the quality of antibodies to take care of the virus as any other person who might be very healthy or younger. And obese goes like with that. Not only that, also multiple underlying lung diseases, you know, heart disease, lung diseases, all of that. And what happens is that sometimes these patients develop the most important complication that sometimes, you know, makes things really complicated is lung disease with respiratory failure that put the patients in very high risk to receive ventilatory support and to be intubated, which might be probably a very bad thing to happen to anybody. So, but most of the patients, remember, most of the patients with COVID, even elderly people, do not reach that stage.
Okay. Jane, you had a question for Dr. Juan Torres, and Dr. Juan Torres is up in the Orlando area. He's an infectious disease specialist working out of a Orlando hospital, a friend of ours, very helpful in our campaign to mobilize 1,000,001 additional evangelicals. So we appreciate on the last minute giving him a call this morning and him taking out the time. We got him for a couple more minutes. Jane, you have a question.
Yes, Dr. Torres, thank you so much for your very calming medical, you know, words this morning, because I know a lot of the public is concerned. And my question is around the fact that, you know, we heard from the president himself a month or two ago that he was taking hydroxychloroquine. And it sounded like he was taking it what we call prophylactically in the medical community, which is as a preventative measure. Is that a short, to your knowledge, would that be a short-lived, you know, protective cover? Or could this be, you know, and I don't want to get conspiratorial, but it makes me very concerned that if he was on HCQ before, why would he test positive? He has often said to us, this is a China virus, and he implies that this is a bioweapon. I'm concerned that maybe someone, I know the Secret Service is very good at what they do. I've worked with them directly, but you know, somebody could have sabotaged his debate environment, the microphone, things like that. I know that's kind of a double question, but the protection around the HCQ, how long does it last,
Yeah.
and why would he still test positive if he had that cover before?
Well, regarding the first point that you made, that it's a China virus, I think that everybody knows that. And the other thing is that regarding why the patient developed COVID even after taking hydroxychloroquine. Anybody can develop any disease even after taking any prophylactic treatment. In other words, prophylactic treatment are not 100% effective all the time. Sometimes we have patients that with influenza, and they receive the influenza vaccine, and despite that, they got the infection. And also, there is no significant data that say that hydroxychloroquine prevent COVID infection. And there are, you know, limited data. There are data that suggest that might not be the case. But remember that this is a new disease. We are learning much more every single day. Maybe, you know, 6 months down the road, in 1 year, we're gonna, you know, say that it works. And many data that has been published is through the media, which most of the time is not necessarily the case. Remember, they told us that 2 million people will die, that this work, that doesn't work. One point that I need to make, which I think is very important, is regarding the mortality rate. The whole world say that the U.S. has 200,000 people that die because of the COVID-19. It's very important to remember the criteria that the CDC used for somebody to die because of COVID. There's one thing that I want people to remember. In the U.S., somebody doesn't need to have a COVID-19 positive test to die because of COVID. I don't say that, the CDC said. On April the 25th, the CDC changed the criteria and they specifically say that. So I would encourage anybody to go to the CDC and read that in the US, we don't need to have a COVID-19 positive to die because of COVID. And I don't want to go into whether this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but that's the case. So when somebody say, or the media say that 200,000 and plus people die in the US because of COVID, that's not the case. The important thing is to know how many of those patients were positive, how many of those patients were probably, how many of those patients never have a positive test.
Thank you,
All right.
Doctor.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Juan Torres. We got to let you go too. We'll be in touch with you, I'm sure, over the next couple of weeks. Bring you back and get your wisdom and your insight. Dr. Juan Torres, ladies and gentlemen. All
Thank
right,
you.
Tom Trento. Take care now. 9:34 in the morning. Mary, how you doing up north? You with us, Mary?
Yep, I'm here, Tom.
Okay, you're controlling everything there. We lost power again today, just before the show. Mark was running around. We had to go get new squirrels out of...
Yeah, or 955 power loss, or
Yeah.
955 power loss.
855, 855.
855, sorry.
We got the squirrels out of the barn. We put them back
Is it
in
by Big
the
Tech?
little wheel, and we're back. We're back
your
live
Big
and in
Tech
color here,
punishment.
9:34. And Dr. Jane Ruby was so good to come in and spend some time with us. Jane, you had this. You not only were you infected. That's an interesting distinction I wasn't making. That you can test positive and not have it. Well, how could that be? It doesn't seem logical. Well, there's a line of demarcation, a testing point that Andy brought up.
Right.
You got to be over that to really have it.
Tom, real quick, I know people who have tested positive for COVID for over a year. I mean, when it first came out, they're like, I've been testing positive the whole time. I don't have it, but I keep testing positive.
It depends on what they're testing for. That's what Dr. Boston pointed out. What are they? I've often asked, what are you testing for? Is it viral fragments? Is it the live DNA of the virus? Is it the end product from your body destroying it once it, saw it as a foreign invader? There's a lot of information we don't get, and the public is so quick to jump on it. So I ask people to really remain calm until we demand to know how they're defining these terms and what does it mean to be tested.
All right, we do have to remain calm. Tom Trento, your host here, 9:35 in the morning. You're listening to WNN 1470. Thank you, Brian and Steve, for delivering a very nice audience to us. We appreciate that. Those guys do a tremendous job. You got to tune in, ladies and gentlemen. You got to tune in to Brian, Craig, Steve Kane. Steve Kane, longest running radio show in South Florida, over 40 years, WNN 1470, 6 a.m. in the morning, all the way through 9 o'clock. They take your calls. We don't. We don't care what you have to say. We don't want to listen to you. We only have an hour. We don't have time for calls. They take your calls. They'll deal with you. They love it. They do a wonderful job. If things go well, we can raise some money. You can go to our website, theunitedwest.org. Donate. We are a fan-generated show. We have no means of revenue other than providing this information to you. If you like what we're doing, you want to keep us on the air, please donate. Any donation is much needed, greatly appreciated, particularly in these days. And who knows, if we raise enough money, we'll have 2 hours. And then who knows, maybe 3 hours. We got it. We've done it before. We've done 3 hours. Remember, Mark? A few years back, we used to do 3 to 6 every day. It was tremendous.
And it felt like 1 hour every day.
It felt like 1 hour. Everything goes by so fast.
By so quick.
But to have an opportunity to frame the way to look at the news of the day in a 9 o'clock hour is just absolutely majestic. And what you're going to hear all weekend is that the president is near death and there's going to be a constitutional crisis and all of this. And they're all saying on the anti-Trump networks, oh, we pray for Melania and we pray. But you can see the smiles when they bring their guests.
Oh, we hope he dies. We hope he dies.
Yeah, we hope he dies. We hope he dies. I mean, they bring the guests on like in a Zoom. And as the host is talking about the infection that the president and POTUS and FLOTUS have, you could see the guests starting to smile a little bit. I'm going, that person's actually happy about this. And I tell you what, I couldn't, if I had to write a Hollywood script, if we had Dan Gordon, our Hollywood script, tremendous writer, write a 2020 Hollywood script about the election, everything from the trade deal in January when Trump put a tremendous trade deal together with China and the crackdown, the building of the wall, then this virus comes, then the stock market goes crazy, then the cities explode, then what else? There was then the pen, this thing grows and grows and grows. Unbelievable. Now, who would have thought? And the left is saying this is an October surprise, an October surprise. And already you're hearing,
and we haven't even brought up Comey or anything like that, or the investigations or anything like that.
Tom,
unbelievable. The impeachment happened in 2020.
2020.
Do you remember that
Tom,
in February?
Let me be your resident conspiracy theorist. I'll give it all to you.
No, Michelle's doing a better job than you. She's already hit me with stuff. Didn't you, Michelle?
So right. True. Sho's true. She's good at it. I can't beat her
She's
out at that.
good at it.
I can stand side by side with her though.
Okay. Here's what I want to do. What, Mary?
I would like to throw into the discussion, how long does he have to be quarantined? And what is that going to mean with only like 30 some days left before November 3rd? What is that going to impact? How badly is that going to hurt him?
Supposedly 14 days, and the next debate is, I believe, 10 or 12 days away. So if he can test negative, though, between now and then, he may bust out, which if we know our president, he will bust out as soon as he can.
He needs two days of testing negative, today and tomorrow. If he does that, then the virus is not in his system anymore, and then he can get back out.
Right. Remember, we can't say yet that he is ill with COVID-19. We are only saying, from what we know, that he has tested positive. Remember my analogy, if I swab you on any given day, you can be positive for a lot of things, but you're not ill. You do not have an infection yet. So anyway, we'll see what happens. But he's not ill with COVID
The
yet.
possible answer to that, Jane, is that Hope Hicks is demonstrating symptoms. She had slight fever, sniffles, these sort of symptoms. And theoretically, last night, the president at around 10 o'clock was telling Sean Hannity that Hope Hicks has tested positive. Right. And he says, Melania and I and everyone got tested. We're very close to her. She is part of what we do every day. And so he's saying, she got it, we may get it, and it may be a similar strand, but it's a different body. But let's shift the focus right now, because we do have to address the constitutional issue of, what happens in the succession of presidencies. Joe Biden could wind up getting this completely unrelated. He's got more comorbidities. If he were to die, what does the Democrat Party do? If the president were to die, what does the Republican Party? What's the Constitution say? It's very complex and very confusing. I'm going to try to simplify it here, and then we'll discuss it. Basically, if there is, if the general election occurs on November 3rd and there's a winner on November 3rd, a month later, the Electoral College meets I think it's the second Wednesday in December. So the election is determined on November 3rd, which probably isn't going to happen because we already have states that said we're allowing the ballots, the mail-in ballots, to come up to 7 days afterwards. So the only way they wouldn't be counted if the president had, such a sufficient lead in that state and the number of ballots remaining was a tenth of that, it probably could be called.
We got to get that Supreme Court picked.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know,
for sure.
Get
But
her in.
let's say by November 10th, there's a clear, decisive winner. And on November 11th, and it can go with either president. It could be Biden or Trump. I'm talking constitutionally now, 9:42 in the morning. And the newly elected president dies before the Electoral College meets the second week in December. All right, you got the timeline?
Yes.
He's the president. It's the 28th of November. Whoever got elected dies. What the heck do you do? Well, each party has their own set of rules. The Democrat Party has a separate set of rules as to how they secede, how they have a secession, a continuation of the presidency. And the Republicans they
Tom?
select.
Tom, breaking news. The White House officially says Trump is experiencing mild symptoms of coronavirus. So
He does have the virus.
AP Press reporting.
Okay, well, you
That shifts
heard
everything.
it here, 9:43 in the morning. You want to read that report?
The Associated Press is reporting that the White House officials are saying President Trump is experiencing, quote, mild symptoms, close quote, of coronavirus after the positive test.
Okay, do they indicate what those symptoms are?
They are not specific. They're going to dribble this stuff out.
Yeah, and well, the White House is going to do that to downplay the stock market exploding, people doing crazy stuff, and that's wise. You want to be transparent, but you don't want to create panic. Just quickly, Jane, you are a survivor of COVID-19. What would you consider to be mild symptoms?
Well,
You're also a doctor, so what would you consider?
yeah. In the beginning of this virus, people, I'll lay out really quickly the strong or severe symptoms. High fevers of 102, 103, unrelenting. Whatever you could think of as the worst flu you've ever had, exaggerated. Profound muscular pain, migrating. Severe headaches, weakness that you can't even describe. In other words, getting up to use the bathroom results in where you have a fatigue that you have to rest for an hour or so. I would say mild symptoms are probably low-grade fever, 99 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe some fatigue, a tiredness because your body's fighting this, maybe a mild headache. Hopefully he does not experience taste or smell disruption or loss. Because that is a hallmark we now know of this virus. So,
Which you had,
which
you
I had.
experienced that,
I had all the severe symptoms. I was lucky not to. The worst part of COVID that took people down was the respiratory failure. This virus in the beginning had a propensity to attack the lungs. Now, I want to make an important point. I guarantee you, President Trump is on treatment right now. The zithromycin, which is an antibiotic, which generally wouldn't have any effect on a virus, is given with HCQ because it has a secondary mechanism of action, and this is important. It blocks the inflammatory cascade in the lungs that throws somebody into that respiratory failure that lands them on a respirator. So it interferes with that cascade. So I would bet my life right now on the fact that he's probably on some kind of treatment like the HCQ, but he also is on the zithromycin to protect his lungs, as well as other things. I mean, this is the best. Walter Reed, those doctors are the best in the world, and they're going to protect the president of the United States at all costs.
Yeah, Jane, what was the
breaking news, Tom? Breaking news,
Yeah.
Tom. The Dow Jones is not crashing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Everybody, they were predicting this. Oh, it's going to drop like 1,000,000 points. No, it's down like a little bit.
little
That's
bit,
good.
okay.
Keep people
We'll keep our eye
keep
on it.
people calm. That's good.
Now, Jane, what was the date? The weeks that you had it.
I know the exact dates because I was supposed to be at Mar-a-Lago with a private lunch with about 50 women for Trump with the First Lady. It was March 25th, but I woke up that morning with initial symptoms of flu. And remember, the difference between the flu and the common cold is that, in general, is that the flu comes on in a matter of hours. The common cold comes on over a matter of days. So I knew something was up. And then I was still sick the 27th of March. Remember, the virus is always strongest in the beginning. So January, February, March was the worst version of this virus you could have, in my opinion.
All right, I referenced that because when you got on the positive side, the good side, where you defeated it,
5 weeks later.
we did a Zoom call with you. We were on the radio then. Right after that, we had to go off the air. We ran out of money, and we had a 1-hour show with you. That was one of our most popular shows. You were not up to it, but you did it, and you laid out in detail.
She was the
what it
best looking
like.
COVID patient ever. I tell
Yeah,
you.
man, it was amazing. All right, let me get back
Thanks,
to
guys.
the concept. We love you, and we're glad you're down here with us.
I am too.
Let me get back to the constitutional situation here.
Yeah.
What I'm explaining, ladies and gentlemen, is information that everyone's asking. We're going to lay it out. Obviously, the president, even with symptoms, is the very, very low percentage of any significant problem, and death even a lower percentage, though he's in a higher category because he's mid-70s and he's overweight. I guarantee you this. When he pulls out of this, guess who's going on a diet? No more McDonald's burgers
I
and all
don't think
that
he's
stuff.
obese. I
He's
think he
clinically
looks
obese,
great.
according to his even his physical that's printed.
I
You
think
can
he
read it.
looks great.
Yeah. He wears. Yes, tailors make his clothes.
He also wears about 200 pounds of Kevlar to protect his body. I
Plus,
mean,
he's a
we'd
big
all
guy.
look fat
I mean,
too.
we've all been next to him. He's a
I've
big
hugged
guy.
him.
Yeah, he's a big guy.
I think he's great.
All right, so here's the situation: if a president wins on November 3rd and dies between November 3rd and the second Wednesday in December, when the electoral college meets, then basically the electors give their votes to the vice president, who is next in line. But that's pretty well determined because the president and vice president were elected. So the vice president would take over. Here's where it gets complicated. The next timeline. If the president dies before the general election on November 3rd, the rules for each party are a little different. The Republican Party basically says that a successor will be determined by a group of electors, 3 from each state, and then 3 from each of the 6 territories for the Republican Party, 168 electors. And they will meet very quickly, and they'll pick someone to follow the deceased president. This is before November 3rd. And the rules were written with the consideration of this happening maybe in January or February, because the rules also say that new ballots have to be written and distributed.
That's what's my question.
Yeah, new ballots have
How
to
do you
be
get that out?
written and distributed. So now, with a timeline of 30 days, if something, God forbid, would happen, the electors, those 168, would most probably place their vote with Pence because he's on the ballot, but they aren't obligated to do that. So if we had some renegade electors who are already identified people from the 50 states and 6 territories say, I was okay with Pence as a vice president. I don't want him to be the president. And there's a dispute within a Republican Party over who's going to be the vice president. Guess where we're going? We're going to the courts. There's going to be a legal battle over that. And I wouldn't doubt if there'd be a legal battle somewhere initiated by the Democrats saying, you can't do that. So it would be a gigantic mess if something unfortunate happened to either of them. If it happened to Joe Biden, the Democrats have the same problem. They have a different number of electors they would utilize to pick, but they could have the same exact problem, and they would have more of a problem. There's less unanimity in their platform, hard Marxist left, hard Marxist central, and hard Marxist right within the Democrat Party. On our side, it's basically Trump-Pence doctrine. So there'd be less of a problem on our side with those 168 people picking somebody before November 3rd even though their name isn't in the place where the president is. And most likely that would be Mike Pence. Your thoughts, guys? We've got a couple minutes left.
Well, it all goes into chaos if something happens to Trump. It obviously does. The whole thing just goes and well, I don't even want to go there in that one. But I do think that this whole Corona thing is with Trump is actually going to turn out to be a positive for him. And the reason I'm saying that, medically, obviously, we want nothing to happen to him. And medically, it's a horrible thing happen. But politically, I think it's actually turned out to a positive because for one simple reason, the Democrats will not be able to control themselves as far as they're attacking a sick person. They will attack him. And anybody who attacks a sick person is an evil person. I'm telling you that's what's going to come across to those moderate independent voters. They're like, you guys are nuts. You're attacking a sick person. That's all they're going to see. And they can't help themselves. So I think it's going to turn into a positive.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. I'm actually getting, some sources back in D.C. telling me live, right now these are not people in the White House or anything. These are just, pundits and opinion people. And one of them is a high-ranking judge, actually, that's an anonymous source for me, but feels that this may be, it's unfortunate. We don't want this to happen, but that, that this may work out to be an advantage for the president. He takes some days off, he rests. People do see that, he is a trooper, and there's a sympathetic, feeling to it. Him coming back, the country is going to be ragingly praying. Those of us who pray, right, in the Judeo-Christian world, are going to be praying fiercely, and that's a huge force of protection around our president. So,
that's a great segue to my concluding thought.
See,
on
thank you,
prayer,
Tom.
on prayer, but
I'm here for you.
But we have more breaking news from Susie Gold, who just sent me this note. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, we know who she is. She's recovering in her Michigan home after learning Wednesday she tested positive for the novel coronavirus, a spokesperson
It's
told
everywhere.
Fox News.
Well,
they're out running around trying to do the right thing for the country, and, you run into this thing.
And I wanted to just make one other point.
You got 30
Tom,
seconds, because I gotta close on the prayer thing.
I want people to remember, as they sit there aghast, we've been living in an ocean of bacteria, fungus, viruses since we left our mother's womb. And for the most part, we do pretty well. So yes, be careful, wash your hands. I was always that person that wiped down the plane seat. I don't know.
No, we weren't.
Anyway,
Well,
thanks,
maybe I will
Tom.
in the future.
Yeah.
Dr. Jane Ruby talked about all of us praying. I was thinking, preparing for today's show, that the person who's going to be praying the most is the guy by the name of Donald J. Trump. Because as we have reported on, as we have detailed here, he has gone through an epiphany and a development, an evolution in his life over the past 4 years by running foursquare into hardcore praying evangelical Christians and Orthodox praying rabbis who surround him. They place their hand on him. They pray for him. And we were talking to somebody the other day that says they're walking down. We had the fellow on yesterday. If he's walking down Bruce Lavelle, a group of Christians with the president, somebody says, let's pray. The president says, let's stop, let's pray. So I think as part of the evolution of Trump becoming more aligned to allow himself to follow the will of God, something like this, something as serious as this, halts you, gives you a sense of mortality, even though the numbers, I had an operation years ago. I had an 80% chance of having a successful, very serious spinal cord operation. But my head was going, what about the 20%? What about that? You go over there. I could be one of those guys. I think, and we need to pray for the president, that as he prays, God speaks to him directly, changes him, conforms him more to an individual that God wants leading this country. Yes. That's our prayer. See you tomorrow.
Said.
No, see you Monday, everybody.